This is going to be basic cleaning on your Taurus Judge revolver. This will work regardless of which model of Judge you have, whether it's the 3-inch Magnum model with a 6-inch barrel, the 2.5-inch model, the polymer frame Judges, or the Judge Executive Grade that you see here. Obviously, the first thing that we're going to do anytime we handle a gun for any purposes is we're going to make sure that it's cleared out. With a revolver, this is very straightforward. We're going to press the cylinder latch forward, and then we're going to use our weak hand to press the cylinder out of the gun so I can then visually look in and see that there are no rounds in the chambers, and I can also visually look in and see that there is no round or projectile lodged in the barrel. Once I know that the gun has been cleared out, I can actually begin my process of cleaning this. The way that I like to do it is I like to start with the cylinder, get the cylinder nice and clean first, and then work my way back to the frame. On the cylinder, the first thing that we're going to want to look at to clean is going to actually be the star, the area under the star, and then the front of the cylinder. To do that, we're going back to our solvent. We're going to take this and we're going to, while holding the ejector rod up so that we can see under the cylinder star, we're going to spray some of this right here on the cylinder star and the area under that. Then we're going to spray a little bit on the star itself. On the front of the cylinder, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to spray this area, making sure we get enough on to cover the fronts of the chambers. And then once that's done, we're actually going to use a fairly aggressive brush for something like this. We want to skip the nylon brushes when we're using a revolver and go with a brush that has your metal tips on it. The reason for this is with a revolver, as you get carbon fouling caked up on the gun, that will actually affect the operation of a revolver a lot faster than it does with a semi-automatic pistol. Remember, revolvers are really good for neglect. I could load this Judge and leave it sitting in a nightstand for 25 years, and I know it'll fire when I bring it out, but they are not good with abuse. So you need to stay on top of your cleaning schedules with any sort of revolver, including the Taurus Judge. Now that I've sprayed it down with solvent, I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to make sure that I'm just scrubbing away any of the fouling or anything like that that I see there on the surface. Once that's done and I've removed the fouling from there, I'm going to once again press up, immobilizing the cylinder, and I'm going to scrub out and away under the star. This is a really important area on your gun to keep clean because if you have unburnt powder or debris under there, it will cause the ejector star to sit proud of the cylinder, which will lock the gun up. When I'm doing this, I always want to make sure that I'm brushing down relative to how I have the gun oriented. I don't want to brush up and into the gun, but I want to brush any debris out of the gun. Now, I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to clean the front of the chambers the same way. This I can get a little bit more aggressive with my brushing. We're going to make sure that we're rotating the cylinder periodically to get all of the different chamber areas clean. This is important because excessive carbon fouling can build up on the front of the cylinder and interfere with the forcing cone, which will also bind the gun up when you're trying to fire. Now, once that's done, I've actually managed to move a lot of lubricant or a lot of solvent down into the actual chambers of the gun. So I want some way to make sure that I get this out. So what I'll do now is I'll take my bore brush, my bore snake, and I will actually go one at a time through each of the cylinders, dragging this through, which will remove any excess solvent as well as any debris that happens to be in the chambers on the revolver. As you might imagine, cleaning a revolver is a bit more of a painstaking process than cleaning a semi-automatic pistol. Don't worry, there's only 2 left. We're almost there. All right, we're on our last chamber here on the Judge. Drag that bore snake through. And now we can turn our attention to the operating areas on the revolver that don't hold any of the cartridges. So this is going to be our barrel. It's going to be where our firing pin comes through the frame, as well as the hand and some other parts of this gun that need attention. As always, as I'm cleaning, I like to wipe down excessive solvent as I go. I don't want that hanging out on the gun any longer than I need it to. So the next area I'm going to turn my attention to is going to be right here. This is where the firing pin actually comes through the frame of the gun and interacts with the cartridge. As you can see, we have a bit of fouling in that location, so we're going to very lightly give it a spray with some solvent, and our brush is going to come back out, and we're going to make sure that we scrub that fouling so we get that nice and clear. We can take our rag, wipe any excess fouling off, and that area is good to go. Next, we're going to turn our attention to one of the most important areas on your revolver to keep clean, and that is the forcing cone. The forcing cone is where the bullet actually enters the barrel, and as you might imagine, a lot of carbon fouling and a lot of lead fouling can build up on this. Again, we're going to stick with our fairly harsh brush because we want to make sure that we're getting this area as clean as possible. To clean this, we're going back to our solvent. I orient the gun up and down, and then I'm going to spray my solvent like this, nice and aggressively, and then we're just going to get after it with our brush here for a bit. It's not like brushing your teeth. You really actually want to get in here. Once we've given that a really aggressive brushing, we can go ahead and take our rag and wipe down any excess solvent. The reason we're wiping as we're going is we want to make sure that the process of brushing and using the solvent has actually removed the carbon and lead fouling from the gun. If you shoot a lot of lead ammunition, you might want to look into using a solvent that's specifically designed to remove lead fouling instead of just your generic solvents, which work pretty good with lead and very good with carbon. Lead fouling can build up, especially if you're using softer rounds or a lot of high volume shooting. So again, we want to take care that we're making sure to get that out of there. So now that our forcing cone is clean, we need to go ahead and clean the barrel. Now I can hold the revolver at this angle and look down it and see that there's fouling in the barrel. So what are we going to do? We're going back to the bore snake and we're going to drop that through and drag it out. Again, moving the bore snake in the same direction down the barrel as a projectile would travel. If you use a lot of lead ammo, a bore snake may not be enough, and you may need to go into actual bore brushes with a lead removing solvent. If you shoot mostly jacketed ammo, or in the case of the judge, mostly buckshot or other 410 shot rounds, you should be fine with your bore snake and regular grade solvents. But now we've done a pretty good job of cleaning this gun, so we want to look at the important areas to lubricate on a revolver. Again, just like a semi-automatic pistol, we're going to be lubricating areas that have metal-on-metal contact. However, with a revolver, most of those areas are actually inside the gun, and we're not going to be removing the side plate to get to them. Luckily, there's an easy way to get at your metal-on-metal contact areas. We can first start with the ones that are on the outside of the gun. So looking at the ejector rod, we want to make sure that that moves freely and has spring tension. And we're going to take our lube and we're going to put a drop of lube on the ejector rod. You want to hold the gun vertically while that runs down, and then you're just going to articulate the ejector rod a couple of times to make sure that distributes itself evenly throughout the gun. We're going to check to make sure that the cylinder rotates freely. It doesn't need to spin super fast, it just needs to rotate freely with no binding. If that's good to go, we can leave it, or if it does feel stiff, we can add a drop of lubrication right here at the front of the cylinder, holding the gun vertical again to allow that to work its way in, and we can just rotate the cylinder to evenly distribute that lube throughout the gun. Once that's been done, we can go ahead and close the cylinder, and the next thing that we're going to do is lubricate the interior of the hammer and the interior of the trigger. To do that, we're going to cock the hammer back, and we're going to put a drop of lube down in the front and one drop on the side and one drop on the other side, holding the gun up and down to allow that lube to work its way down into the action. Once that's been done, what we want to do is we want to cock and release the hammer 6 to 12 times to make sure that lubrication is being distributed down through the internals of the revolver. The last point that we want to lube, we're going to go ahead and turn the gun upside down, and we're going to place the drop of lubricant on one side of the trigger and the other side of the trigger. And we're going to allow those to work their way kind of down into the gun a little bit, just letting gravity do what it does. And then once that's done, we want to roll the gun back over. We want to dry fire it again 6 to 12 times to make sure that lubrication is evenly distributed on the trigger face. Now, if you're going to be storing this gun for a long period of time, you can apply a thin coat of lubricant all over the exterior of it. And I do mean a thin coat. What I mean by that is I'll actually take the lube and I'll apply a bit to the tip of my finger, and I'll just apply that to the entire exterior of the gun, just using the lube that I applied to my index finger to make sure it's well lubricated for long-term storage. Now, if I wasn't going to be storing this gun, and if I was going to be taking it out on a hunt or something like that, I wouldn't apply that coat of lubricant. I would just make sure that the functional areas are well lubricated, and then the gun would be good to go. Now your Taurus Judge has been cleaned, you've gotten all your fouling out of it, and it's been lubricated either for long-term storage or it's ready to take out on your next outdoors adventure.